Okay, good morning. Well, welcome to the English language class. Today we'll be looking at grammatical names and functions. Grammatical names and functions. Now, in doing our grammatical names and functions under our comprehension, two things are very, very vital. These are called clause and phrase. Clause and phrase. Now, what is a clause? A clause is a group of words that contains a finite verb. A clause is a group of words that contains a finite verb. For example, the man whose wife came to our house is around. The underlined whose wife came to our house. Now, whose wife came to our house contains a finite verb, came. Came here is a finite verb. Let's see another example. Whatever you need will be provided. Whatever you need will be provided. Whatever you need is underlined. If you look at the underlined word, it contains a finite verb, need. Need is a finite verb, there is a present tense plural. Also, if you look at, I will go whenever you are ready. I will go whenever you are ready. The underlined whenever you are ready. Now, whenever you are ready, it contains a finite verb, are. It contains a finite verb, are. Are is a present tense plural. Very soon we'll come back to find out what we actually mean by finite verb. But just know that a clause must contain what is called a finite verb. Now, under our clauses, we shall be looking at types. So we shall be looking at noun clause, adjectival clause, and adverbial clause. Now take note, your adjectival clause can also be called a relative clause. Now for our adjectival clause, or adverbial clause, we have different types of adverbial clauses. We have what they call adverbial clause of time, adverbial clause of place, adverbial clause of manner, adverbial clause of reason, adverbial clause of purpose, adverbial clause of condition, adverbial clause of concession, adverbial clause of result, adverbial clause of degree, which can also be called adverbial clause of frequency. Now, also we shall be looking at our phrase. What is a phrase? A phrase is a group of words that does not contain a finite verb. A phrase does not contain what is called a finite verb. Now, the question is, can a phrase contain a verb? Yes, but it cannot contain what they call a finite verb. It can contain a verb, but not a finite verb. Remember, we said that very soon we are going to look at what we mean by finite verb. Now, let us see examples of phrases. Now, if we have what to sing is not a problem. What to sing is not a problem. What to sing is underlined. Does it contain a verb? Yes, it does. What is the verb? Sing. But this verb sing in these underlined words, okay, is not a finite verb. Why? Because of the to. Very soon we shall explain that better. But let us just know that whenever you have to plus a verb, that verb automatically becomes a non-finite verb. The pretty tall lady is my daughter. The pretty tall lady is my daughter. Now, if you look at the pretty tall lady, it doesn't contain any verb at all. It doesn't contain any verb at all. Therefore, it is a phrase because it doesn't contain any verb at all, so it is a phrase. But let's see the third example. Singing the song is a problem. Singing the song is a problem. They underlined singing the song. Now, singing the song contains a verb, but it is not a finite verb. That singing there is a verb, but that singing is a non-finite verb. I hope you understand that very well. Okay, now let us see the types of phrases that we have. Let's see the type of phrases that we have. Under our phrases, we have we are going to see we have some types of phrases, just as we talked about some types of clauses. We also have some types of phrases. Okay, so if we look at our phrase, we have types. We have types of phrases. We have our types of phrases. We have types of phrases. So under our types of phrases, we shall look at 1, noun phrase. We shall look at 2, adjectival phrase. Adjectival phrase. We have 3, we have adverbial phrase. Adverbial phrase. We have 4, we have what they call prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrase. We have 5, we have what they call gerundial phrase. A gerundial phrase. And then 6, we can also talk about infinitive phrase. Infinitive phrase. So under our phrases, just like our clauses, we shall be looking at noun phrase, adjectival phrase, adverbial phrase, prepositional phrase, gerundial phrase, and infinitive phrase. Now, but before we go into these types of clauses and types of phrases, I want us to have a full understanding of what we mean by finite verb. Remember, in our definition of a clause, we said it is a group of words that contains a finite verb. While our phrase, we said, is a group of words that does not contain a finite verb. Now, let us see what we mean by finite verbs. Let's see what we mean by our finite verbs. It will help us to have a full understanding of this topic. Okay? So, if we talk about a finite verb simply means a verb that can change. Take note, it is a verb that can change in relation to number, person, or tense. It is a verb that can change in relation to number, person, or tense. But how about what we call a non-finite verb? A non-finite verb is a verb that cannot change. A non-finite verb cannot change in relation to number, person, or tense. It can't change to number, person, or tense. But you see, that could be a bit cumbersome trying to look at this definition. So we are going to do something. We are going to have a table that will help us understand what they call finite and non-finite. So let us have finite and non-finite. Finite and non-finite verbs. Okay, let us have our table. Let's have present tense here, singular. Let's have a present tense, plural. Let's have a past tense. Let's have a present participle. Let's have a past participle. And let's have an infinitive. So we are going to call this place our present tense, but it is singular. It's our singular. We'll call this place present tense, but let's call it our plural. Plural. Let's call this place our past tense. Let's call this place our present participle. Let's call this place our past participle. And let's call this place our infinitive. Now take note, how do we form infinitives? Infinitives are formed by to plus verb. So anytime you have to plus verb, that verb automatically becomes infinitive verb. It becomes infinitive verb. So if we have is and am, we have are here. We have was or were. Was or were. We have been here. We have been. And we have the word to be. Let's see the verb does, which is present tense singular. The plural will give you do. Past tense will give you did. Present participle will give you doing. Past participle will give you done. Infinitive will give you to do. To do. Let's have a verb such as eats, which is present singular. Present plural will give you eat. Past tense will give you ate. Present participle will give you eating. Past participle will give you eating. And infinitive will give you to eat. To give you to eat. To give you to eat. Okay? I hope we understand it up to this level. We understand up to this level. Okay. Now, remember, any verb you can put in these first three boxes is called finite verb. While any verb you can put in these last three boxes is called non-finite verb. It's called a non-finite verb. So, a finite verb is simply a verb that you can put in your present tense plural, present singular, present plural, and then past tense. Your finite verb is any verb you can put your present tense singular, present tense plural, and past tense. While your non-finite verb is a verb you can put in your present participle, past participle, and infinitive. You can put them in present participle, past participle, and infinitive. Now, good. Now, the moment you understand the difference between your finite and non-finite verb, then we can now tackle our types of clauses and our types of phrases. We can tackle our types of clauses and our types of phrases. Now, today we shall be looking at our noun clause and noun phrase. We shall be looking at noun clause and noun phrase. Okay. Now, so we shall be looking at noun clause and noun phrase. Noun clause and phrase. Noun clause and phrase. Now we are going to use a very simple method in getting this, and I call it the diagram method. We call it the diagram method. Now, so let us call them diagram 1 and diagram 2. Let's have diagram 1. Diagram 1 gives us underline word plus verb. They ask us what is the grammatical name and what is the function. Diagram 2 gives us verb plus underline words. They ask us what is the grammatical name and what is the grammatical function. Okay, now watch. The moment you have an underlined word, immediately after that underlined word, if you have a verb, just don't waste your time, write noun. Then come here and write subject of the verb. Subject of the verb. That verb that is here, the verb that is here is what you are going to write. You put it in quotes. Then you go back to the underlined word and ask yourself, does it contain a finite verb? What are these finite verbs again? Present tense singular, present tense plural, and past tense. If your answer is yes, write a clause. But if your answer is no, write a phrase. Diagram 2 tells you that if you have a verb first plus underline words, also write a noun, but this time around call it object. Call it object of the verb. Object of verb. So the verb that is here is what you are going to put there. The verb that is there. Then go back to that underline word and ask yourself, if it contains a finite verb, you write a clause. But if it doesn't, you write a phrase. Okay, beautiful. Now let us see examples. Let us see SSCE 1989. SSCE 1989. It says, the courage to fail. The courage to fail is very cheap. The courage to fail is very cheap. They underlined the courage to fail. They asked us what is the grammatical name, what is the function. Let us see SSCE. Let's see SSCE 2003. SSCE 2003. It says, the eggs of the ostrich are the largest in the world. They underlined the eggs of the ostrich. They asked us what is the grammatical name and what is the function. Let us see one more example. Let us have SSCE 2004. SSCE 2004, where they said, what we experience daily what we experience daily, are the vicious consequences, of unemployment. They underlined what we experience daily, and they asked us what is the grammatical name and what is the grammatical function. They said, what is the grammatical name and what is the grammatical function? What's the grammatical name? What's the grammatical function? Okay, now if we look at these three examples, you would agree with me that they all fall under diagram number 1. Diagram number 1 says underline word plus verb should be called a noun, subject of the verb. So if we look at the courage to fail, it is coming before the verb is. It's coming before the verb is. Okay, so it agrees with our diagram number 1. So let us write a noun. And let us call it subject of the verb is. The subject of the verb is. Then let us go back to that underlined word. Does it contain a verb? Yes. What is the verb? Fail. But is this fail a final verb? The answer is no. Why? Because of the word to. Remember, infinitive, to plus verb. So this is what? A phrase. So this is a noun phrase functioning as subject of the verb is. Now let's say the second example. The eggs of the ostrich, underline word, then you have a verb. Okay, also write what? A noun. Still the same word, subject of the verb are. It is subject of the verb are. Okay, go back to the underlined word. Does it contain a final verb? The answer is no. It cannot contain any verb at all. So it is what? A phrase. But if you look at the third example, it is still the same underlined word plus verb. So it still gives you the same noun. Okay, it still gives you the same subject of the verb are. But if you go back to the underlined word, you notice that it contains a final verb. What is the final verb? The final verb is where experience. Experience is a present tense plural. So this is what? A clause. So this one gives us a noun clause, subject of the verb are. That gives us a diagram number 1. It gives us a diagram number 1. Okay? It gives us a diagram number 1. But let us see a diagram number 2. Let's see diagram number 2. Let us see a question such as this. Let's see a question such as this in diagram number 2. In SSCE 2000, in SSCE 2000, okay, it says Joe thought it was a tremendous idea. Joe thought it was a tremendous idea. They underlined it was a tremendous idea. And they asked us what is the grammatical and what is the function. Now, if you look at this example, for instance, you are going to notice that it agrees with our diagram number 1. How do we know it is our diagram number 1? Diagram number 2, it agrees with our diagram number 2. How do we know it is diagram number 2? Diagram number 2 says that if you have a verb first, then after the verb you have underlined word, you write what? A noun, object of the verb. So let us see, Joe thought. If you look at Joe thought is what? A verb. Immediately after that verb thought, you have what? You have an underlined word. So this is what? A noun, which gives you what? Object. It gives you object of the verb thought. It gives you object of the verb thought. Go back to the underlined word. Does it contain a final verb? Yes. What the final verb was. So this is what? A clause. It gives you a clause. Okay. So this gives us noun clause, object of the verb thought. But imagine we have a question like this. Where they said, the lady entered, the lady entered a very big house. And they underlined a very big house. And we are asked what is the grammatical name and what is the function. Now, if you look at this question, for instance, does it agree with diagram number 1? The answer is no. Why? Diagram number 1 tells you that you must have an underlined word then a verb. And this does not have underlined word plus verb. But does it agree with diagram number 2? Yes. Diagram number 2 says verb, then underline word. So, if you look at entered, entered is what? A verb. Entered is a verb. And immediately after that verb entered, you have what? An underlined word. So, that means that this underlined word is what? A noun. What will be the function? It gives you what? Objects. It gives you object of the verb. What verb is that? Entered. Entered. Gives you the object of the verb entered. Then let us go back to that underlined word. Does it contain a finite verb? Does it even contain any verb at all? The answer is no. A is not a verb. Very is not a verb. Big is not a verb. Neither is house a verb. So it doesn't contain any verb at all. So is it a phrase or a clause? Very good. A phrase. So what is a phrase? A group of words that does not contain a finite verb. Now, we have been able to look at diagram number 1 and diagram number 2. But I want us to go back to them again. Now remember, a clause is a group of words that contains a finite verb. A clause is a group of words that contains a finite verb, while a phrase is a group of words that does not contain a finite verb. A phrase is a group of words, that does not contain a finite verb. Okay? Now, remember I told us that a finite verb is a verb that can change, while a non-finite verb is a verb that cannot change. But we have been able to do something. We have been able to look at a table that can help us understand what they call finite and non-finite verbs. So there are 3 types of finite verbs. What are they? Present tense singular, present tense plural, and what? Past tense. They are called what? Finite verbs. Then present participle, past participle, and infinitives. How do you form infinitives? Infinitives are formed by to plus verb. To plus verb. So that will give you what? Non-finite verb. So even if a phrase contains a verb, ask yourself, the verb it contains, is it a finite verb? Okay? If it is not a finite verb, then it is what? A phrase. But even if it is a verb, but it's not finite, it is still what? A phrase. But if it is finite, then it is what? A clause. Okay? Now, let's still go back to our diagram number 1 and 2 again. Let's refresh our memory with that diagram 1 and diagram 2. Let's go back. Okay, so with our diagram number 1 and 2, we can easily talk about noun clause and noun phrase. Okay, diagram number 1 says that if we have an underlined group of words, they underline a group of words, immediately after that underlined word, you have a verb in front. Will they underline the verb in front? The answer is no. No. Okay, diagram number 2 says if you have a verb first plus an underlined word, okay, it will give you noun, object of the verb. Okay, so diagram number 1 gives you noun, subject of the verb. Now, how do you know when it is a clause or a phrase? If it contains a finite verb. Diagram number 2 will give you noun, object of the verb. Okay, how do you know whether it is a clause or phrase? If it contains a finite verb. So when we see our examples, okay, in diagram number 1, remember we talked about the courage to fail is very cheap. The courage to fail is very cheap. The courage to fail is very cheap. Now remember that the courage to fail is very cheap. They underline the courage to fail. The underlined word there is coming before is. Is a present tense singular. So is coming after the underlined word. So the courage to fail is a noun. Subject of the verb is. It is a noun. Subject of the verb is. Then we now ask ourselves, that courage to fail, does it contain a verb? Yes, it does. But is it a finite verb? No. Because of what? To, that is very close to that fail. So it is a noun phrase. subject of the verb is. Okay? Then we also talk about whatever we experience daily. Okay, what we experience daily are the vicious consequences of unemployment. What we experience daily are the vicious consequences of unemployment. So if we look at the underlying words, the underlying word is coming before the verb are. It's coming before the verb are. So it still agrees with your diagram number 1. So this is also what? A noun, subject of the verb are. It is a noun, subject of the verb are. But it is a clause because it contains experience. Experience is a present tense plural. Experience is a present tense plural. Okay, remember experience will be a present tense plural. What will be the singular? Experiences. What will be the plural? Experience. What will be the past tense? Experience. What will be the present participle? Experiencing. Past participle? Experience. And infinitive to experience. So experience can fall under our what? Present tense plural. So that makes it a finite verb. It makes it a finite verb. Okay? Now, watch SSC 2000. Joe thought it was a tremendous idea. They underlined it was a tremendous idea. If you look at the underlined words, it is coming after the verb thought. Look at your diagram number 2. Verb, then underline word. So it's coming after the verb thought. So just call it what? A noun. They call it object of the verb thought. It is object of the verb thought because it's coming after the verb thought. Now, is it a clause or a phrase? Remember again, it is what? A clause. How do we know it's a clause again? It contains was. Was is a past tense verb. So that makes it a clause. Then the lady entered a very big house. Entered is a verb. Entered is a verb. Immediately after the verb entered, you have what? Underlined words, which makes it a noun. Object of the verb entered. But is it a clause or a phrase? A phrase, because it does not contain any verb at all. It doesn't contain any verb at all. So I believe that with these two diagrams, we should be able to identify where something is a noun. Okay? Now, in case you want to have a test, okay, you want to test if you are right, whether it is a noun or not, just ask yourself, can that thing answer the question what or who? Anything that can answer the question what or who is a noun. Can we try? Okay, let us see. Let's see this example, for instance. Okay. What? Okay. If we say the lady entered a very big house, we simply say, okay, what did the lady enter? What did the lady enter? A very big house. That makes it a noun. Let's see this. Joe thought it was a tremendous idea. What did Joe think? It was a tremendous idea, so it's a noun. Let's try this one. What are the vicious consequences of unemployment? What we experience daily. So anything that can answer the question what or the question who can also be said to be a noun. Imagine if somebody asks you, what is your name? Whatever you say is a noun. Okay? Or somebody asks you, what did you do to him? You say, I slapped him. I slapped him is a noun. Who was there when you slapped him? My friends. My friends is a noun. So just know that anything that can answer the question what or who can also be called a noun. So after examining your diagram and you want to be sure, ask yourself, okay, can that thing answer the question what or who? If it can do that, then it is what? A noun. I hope that is very, very understood. Thank you very much. We'll meet in the next class.